Hi, everybody. Let's get going. Thanks for coming out so early for Saturday morning MAGFest time, I guess. Turns out when you say you're available from 10 a.m., there's actually a chance that they'll give you that panel slot. Who knew? So I'll just do a quick intro here. I'm Brian Clark. I'm an author, translator, video creator guy who runs 1 Million Power, which is also a YouTube channel, which is also where the idea of this panel came from. I do a series called Scrolling Down the Belt that looks at beat-em-ups in mostly chronological order. And on that series, I just kind of wrapped up the beat-em-ups of the 80s, and I kind of wanted to take a little bit of a look back at those and kind of see how those formative years for that genre went. I have more games than I will probably be able to get through in this, so some of them might go a little quick, but we'll see how we do here. And we're just gonna we're gonna kind of have B-roll of these running behind for reference. So everything has to start somewhere, right? And it's always dangerous to say that something is the first of anything, because someone will invariably come in and say, oh no, this obscure whatever game on whatever platform that 5 people have heard of was actually the first. But I think most people pretty widely regard Kung Fu Master, Kung Fu, however you prefer to call it, as the first beat-em-up here. This was an IREM game from 1984. You can kind of see what it's about pretty quickly just by watching the B-roll here. It's single planes, punch kick, jump kick, crouch. This is an up-to-jump game, if anyone remembers those things. So that's probably the first thing that will throw you off if you play this. Unfortunately, I don't believe they have this in the MAGFest arcade anywhere. This, most people probably know, but this was, in Japan, it was a tie-in, it was called Spartan X, which was the Japanese title of a Jackie Chan movie called Meals on Wheels. So this is also a pretty early licensed game as well. But that said, if you kind of look at what's happening in here, it's actually a lot more like a Bruce Lee movie called Game of Death than it is the Jackie Chan movie that's supposedly based on, just because he's sort of ascending floors of a pagoda and challenging, subsequently stronger martial artists and whatnot. So it's very much more like that. And one person who was the designer of this game, and so is pretty much key to the beat-em-up genre, is Takashi Nishiyama. You probably know him for a bunch of things, but at this point he was at IREM. He did Moon Patrol in 1982 before he went on to Kung Fu Master. Then he left IREM for Capcom, where he did Trojan, which unfortunately I won't be able to cover here for time, but there's a video on that if you want to check that out. And ultimately Street Fighter 1 as well. So it's this weird thing where beat-em-ups sort of are directly responsible for fighting games in a way. And he would later then go on to SNK to do like the Fatal Fury series and Art of Fighting and whatnot too. So he sort of turned into a fighting game guy after a while. But he mentioned in later interviews that like the idea for Street Fighter came from this idea that actually came from Kung Fu of like having a one-on-one battle with a boss. And if you think about it, it wasn't like in 1984, like the idea of facing a boss in the end of a level in a video game, or really like a video game having any sort of real story at all, was not always a thing. So this was a pretty early example of that. One thing I'll point out here, because you're seeing it on the B-roll here, is this is a pretty straightforward game to clear. But this magician boss here is horrible if you're playing in the arcade version. So you have this trick where you actually get the real version of him to spawn behind you, or his clone to spawn behind you, I forget. So like you walk him to the edge of the stage and basically just punch him and he can do nothing to you. That's a horrible boss fight if you try and do it legitimately, because he shoots all kinds of projectiles at you. And this is the last boss here, Mr. X, who you also kind of have to cheese in his own way. He heals, as you can probably see his health regenerating little by little there. And as it turns out, his AI can't really handle it if you get right up on him and crouch. Most of the time he kind of won't know what to do with that. So you kind of have to keep doing that to have too much of a chance against him. But if some of you are looking at this and thinking, yeah, I played Kung Fu, but I don't remember it really looking like this, you're actually probably thinking of the NES port. And here's the magician in the NES port who's way more manageable. He doesn't have a clone, so all you have to do is duck under his fireballs. So before we move on to the next one, something real quick about the NES port. I mean, in general, it's a pretty good conversion, right? Like, sure, it's arcade to NES, and so maybe it's not as visually impressive, but, okay, volume is quite a bit higher on that one. But this one was actually developed and published by Nintendo, even though this was an IRM game. So the story with that goes that Shigeru Miyamoto, who I'm sure everybody here knows, really wanted to work on this because he was so impressed with the idea of the clean side scrolling. And he wanted to kind of get some experience with that to work on for his own games. And so they kind of went over the person at IREM's head who they were working with to get permission to do this themselves, because an employee there wanted this to be IREM's first game on the Famicom. He did not like that very much and got very upset. And so if you've ever seen any of the actual IREM published Famicom cartridges, like Load Runner and things like that, they have a little LED light at the top to indicate when they're on. That was a concession to make up for going over, folks at IREM's head. That probably was not something Nintendo wanted to do for cost reasons, if nothing else. So sort of an apology. But Kung Fu is just a single plane, right? You can't move up, you can't move down. What was the first game where you could actually move up and down? It was this. It was Renegade, Nekketsu Koha Kunio-kun, whichever you prefer. I have a little bit of footage of actual Renegade in here, but I prefer the aesthetics of the Kunio games way more than I do just like a guy in a t-shirt and jeans or whatever. So this is Technos Japan 1986, and you can see here, though I'm not particularly doing it in this part, you can move up and down, right? So this is what belt scrolling is, for those who don't know. Like, I can not only move left and right, but I can also move up and down sort of freely across the screen. But your movement is pretty limited here, right? Like you're sort of boxed into a level. It's not just free scrolling like some of the ones we'd see later. But other games will improve on this. And so the story here is like your typical kind of like Japanese. This is what they turned it into in the West, by the way, Renegade. They just sort of did like the Warriors, sort of typical 1980s like gang aesthetic sort of thing, because they didn't know what to do with a Yankee in like a Japanese high school uniform, right? So the other thing that you might know, if anybody knows anything about the Kunio series, they're probably looking at this and saying, okay, well, localization aside, this isn't what Kunio looks like. He's a squat little guy that runs around and plays dodgeball and various sports. He didn't look like that in the first game. They didn't kind of really find this visual identity until River City Ransom, which hopefully we'll get to in a bit here. But yeah, he was just sort of a bigger fellow with maybe more realistic proportions, depending on how you look at it. But what you can't really tell from the B-roll here is the kind of weirdo control scheme that this game has. So if anyone's ever played this or Double Dragon 2, you're not just attacking in the direction that you're facing. One button attacks left and one button attacks right relative to the direction that you're facing. So like if Kunio is facing left here and I hit the left button, he's going to punch forward, and if I hit the second button, he's going to kick backward. And so when you turn him around, he does exactly the opposite. And so there's a jump button that you can use to do the hit together with the direction to do the jump kick as well. And pretty much jump kicking through your game is more or less what you do. We're cutting over to the NES Famicom port here. But yeah, most of the strategy to this game, if you look back here, was kind of like taking out enemies with weapons first. And then you just kind of jump kick these guys to death, because that's the best way to handle crowds. And I'm going on to the other slide. Oops. And pretty much a boss comes out, and you take care of the boss. And on to the next level you go. Some of the bosses are tougher than others. I can't remember if I had Misuzu on here or not. I felt like I did, but now I do not see it. Anyway, the last level, which I did not put in here, is a horrible gauntlet because Sabu, the last boss, actually has a gun. And it's one-hit kill. And he's surrounded by guys with knives who are also one-hit kill. So you can, if you kind of figure out the systems here, you can kind of, sleepwalk your way through some of the earlier levels, but the last boss is absolutely brutal. And so the key figure in this was Yoshihisa Kishimoto, who is a Technos Japan employee, who pitched this idea as a semi-autobiographical game. Supposedly he got into a bunch of fights in high school. So I guess he went to this sort of high school, and this was supposedly kind of sort of about his life. I don't know exactly how much was elaborated upon, but that's the story. And he also loved martial arts films and just sort of generally wanted a game that like more accurately depicted what, fighting with another person was like. I don't know that if I get into a fight with another person, I just jump kick them repeatedly, but, personal preference. And so this got ported to the NES too, as we were kind of getting into here. Again, this is Kunio and not Renegade, but they kind of did the same thing to it. It's kind of general the same ideas, but they had this weird fascination with mazes. So like you can see there are two doors here, right? And if I don't, a man riding a motorcycle indoors inside this other door as well. But if you don't pick the right sequence of doors to go through in this, you're just kind of out of luck and you end up back where you started. Which is not great and not really what happened in the original game at all. This is the NES version of Sabu. I think you'll see him actually shoot his gun. Yeah, there he goes. He's a little easier to cheese out in this one than he is in the arcade version. But then let's see here, and then it has like things like this bike chasing scene that it had. Like in the arcade version, you fought people with bikes, but you never actually rode on a bike. So kind of what they did with NES stuff back then, they just added little things to it to make it a little more distinct from the arcade version. And so very shortly after that, probably you guys all know, you all know this one, getting Marion getting punched in the gut there at the beginning. But this was 1987, also Technos Japan, Double Dragon, another Yoshihisa Kishimoto game. Pretty much the requirements for this one from Technos were they wanted, after the success of Kunio, they wanted a game that had more international appeal, that they didn't quite have to do the whole localization treatment that they had to do on for Renegade. So they wanted something that like a Western audience would just look at and inherently understand, and a game that had two simultaneous players, which Kunio was not. It's only me playing in this one, but if you've ever played Double Dragon before, obviously you know the fun in it is two-player, right? And originally Kishimoto thought of this as a direct sequel to Renegade, but apparently, according to him in interviews, he just kept thinking about Enter the Dragon, the Bruce Lee movie. This is nothing like Enter the Dragon, so I think he just took the word dragon, and that's the extent to which he really thought about Enter the Dragon. And instead of pulling from real life experience, this is it's not necessarily presented to you very clearly in the story, but this is like a post-apocalypse thing. So it's more kind of like Mad Max, Fist of the North Star background stuff. I believe the story is there's some sort of like nuclear fallout or something in like 99X, which is just Fist of the North Star. So many games from this time were, and then this is like New York is controlled by violent gangs that punch women in the stomach and sling them over their shoulders, I guess. I mean, one thing you probably notice, and you can kind of see as you finish the level here, is like the levels are continuously scrolling. So you kind of have these transitions where you just go immediately from one part of the level to the other, versus Renegade, where it just, you had sort of you didn't have like a smooth transition like that, right? It was cut, and now you're in level 2 on a subway platform or something, right? And even though this was conceived as a sequel to Renegade, like the controls are much more straightforward. It's just like you just attack the direction that you're facing in. Yeah, how many people have had troubles with this jump? I had to include like my footage of like my horrible attempts at this, and like I almost had a heart attack when he threw me back over, but somehow I managed to actually land on the other side and then I just fell in. So yeah, they do make you do a little bit of platforming in this game, but it's nothing compared to the NES version that we'll get to in a minute. And if you've ever played Arcade Double Dragon, you know that you only need to use one move and one move only. Let me get back to the abobos here, and that's the elbow. Basically, if you watch someone playing this game efficiently, they're just repositioning themselves and elbowing enemies over and over and over again, because the elbow has this nice big hitbox. Enemies don't really know what to do against it, and so you can get them pretty much every time. This is the also other horrible part of Double Dragon that I'm sure people are familiar with, and I haven't really figured out how you're supposed to get through this cleanly. I think there's some strategies out there more for the NES version, but I couldn't really find anything for the arcade one other than just people getting lucky. Other interesting thing to mention is this is one of the first beat 'em ups to not just make you restart the level over when you die. When you continue, you just put in another quarter and you pick up right where you left off, which was not the case in either of the two games we looked at up to this point. And then when you beat Machine Gun Willie here, I'm not doing two-player, so you can't see it, but if it was a two-player, you'd basically have to fight each other to see who gets to rescue Marion. And you probably saw throughout here, the original arcade board itself even has horrible slowdown when there's any kind of enemies on the screen. Like, it's very easy to think, oh, I'm playing this in an emulator and this is just not running it right. No, the original arcade board runs that way too. So not very optimized. But maybe more people, I don't know if more people played the NES port or not, but I feel like the NES port is what people generally think of. And anyone who's played it know that the NES port is almost a completely different game. Like, it has some of the trappings of Double Dragon, like, you know, you've got abobos and whatnot, but it has this weird level up system with the hearts you can kind of see underneath the health bar down there, where you unlock moves as you gain more levels. And so you can't do some of your really powerful stuff until you've, you know, either farmed a bunch of enemies or got a little later in the game. They also added a lot more platforming to this, like a lot. Oh, I love, this is an amazing moment in Double Dragon for me that actually happened. And Machine Gun Willie in this, by the way, like, you can just get him on the bottom of the screen and his bullets just do nothing somehow, which is great. Yeah, there's the hair pull, which is pretty much what you're using in this game. And then you can't do two-player simultaneous in this, which is the other thing about this version of Double Dragon. It's alternating, but you end up fighting your brother in the end because apparently he was the one behind everything all along, etc., etc. There's a cat. They actually prepared a pretty nice room for Marion in this one. She's not just like hanging up on the wall. She has like a room with a cat and a bed and a couch. This one obviously had a ton more ports that we don't have time to cover, but real quick temperature check here. So since we've seen a Kunio-kun game and we've seen a Double Dragon game, like, what are people here more who's a more of a Double Dragon person than a Kunio person? Okay, what about I did buy the Kunio-kun. Yeah, they had that. That had like one collection had like both of them, didn't it? It had like some Double Dragon games and some Kunio games. Yes, I'm excited for that one. I haven't gotten to it yet on the videos yet. But is anybody more of a Kunio-kun series person than a Double Dragon person? Yeah, I'm kind of with you there. I think Kunio-kun are better games. Yeah. Yeah. But should I have included this in here? I don't know, but I love this game, so I did.
Did not come. Because the Ninja Warriors
Hold on.
are the immortal murder machines.
The immortal murder machines. There we go. The Ninja Warriors. So this was a Taito joint from 1988, and like maybe not as historically important as the ones that we've looked at up until now. Right? Yeah, the remake is great. The remake is also sort of a very different sort of game. But we're including the original in here since the Ninja Warriors Again, which was originally a Super Famicom game, was not 80s, so it doesn't qualify for this, unfortunately. We're back on a single plane with this one, but like you can anybody who is a Taito fan. We did a panel yesterday on house bands, which includes Taito's sound team Zuntata, and like this is Daddy Mulk, maybe like their flagship song. And it's just like so impactful. You've got like a shamisen solo that is playing here. It's kind of a weird story. It's like there's someone named Benglar who possesses some sort of supernatural powers, who's instituted himself as the president. And a revolutionary army sprung up to rise against him, and they want to assassinate him by creating robot ninjas, of course. And this was kind of in the middle of like ninja fever for the US. Like there were so many movies about ninjas and just so much media. So that's really more than likely why this game was the way it was. The controls on this one are kind of interesting. You do a lot of riding on tanks, and manipulating the tanks is certainly a thing, because there's more of them than just this one. But you kind of move very slowly. You have an attack button that's also your melee, but holding it does that guard. And to do the flip, you have to be guarding and then hit an upper diagonal to do a jump, which is key to dealing with the tanks. And then you have another button for shurikens, which you can just kind of use to take out enemies at a distance. But you do have a limited amount of them, so you kind of have to do management for that. And I may have it in here somewhere, but as you take damage, like since this is a robot, like you expose pieces of like the Terminator style like exoskeleton that's underneath. So you can have like a ninja with like a, long flowing blonde hair and like a robot exoskeleton face, if you take too much damage to the face there. And they kind of throw you in these really, really rough boss situations. This is definitely a game that you have to learn. And this was a follow-up to another Taito game called Darius, which was a shoot-'em-up, and it was a gigantic cabinet that had 3 monitors and a subwoofer under the seat to kind of, make you feel the game. And so I think that's why they kind of amped up the music in this one, because they knew they were going to repurpose the same cabinet, and they wanted to take full advantage of that. And the last boss in this is absolutely terrible. As you're going you kind of have to get in on this guy, and there's these guys coming at you from other sides, and you just kind of have to wait for your moment. But it's really hard to tell when your moment is. And so I don't know that I've actually managed to not continue my way through this. There was a Sega CD port, which we won't spend too much time on, but it did have these weird cutscenes. If anybody knows Zuntata, that's Tamayo right there. These are like actual people from Zuntata in this. And the weird thing about this is the name of the song Daddy Mulk here. They have an English voice actor pronouncing it as Daddy Mark.
Daddy Mark must be the answer.
Right there. Daddy Mark must be the answer. So I don't know. I've only ever heard it called. I've never actually heard anyone outside of that call it Daddy Mark. I don't know if that was the intention or not, but it's just kind of a weird, interesting thing. All right, so Altered Beast. There we go. I had to put it at the beginning. This was also 88. Probably everybody's played Altered Beast once, or at least everybody knows Rise from Your Grave. Basically, the deal here is the guy you saw at the beginning there was Zeus, who resurrects you, a beast warrior, to defeat a demon god and save his daughter Athena. So this one's also pretty straightforward. Punch, kick, jump. The only important thing is just kind of knowing the ranges of all of these. And you're collecting these orbs from those white wolves until you eventually do, in fact, power up into a beast, which I will cut to here in a moment. The hitboxes are kind of weird on some of these enemies in the arcade version. Like, if they come at you at specific angles, you really kind of have to know, oh, do I need to use the downward attack for this? Like, what does my spacing need to be? It takes a little bit of learning, and the Genesis version kind of fixes all of that. Like, the hitboxes on the Genesis version are great. The arcade one is a little bit rough and takes a little bit of learning. But the Genesis one is a really good conversion. I'm not particularly going to show it here because it's very similar. And here's the beast transformation. So then you kind of just go through the rest of the level in beast form here until you finally get to the boss, which you can only get to if you're in beast form. If you make this guy spawn and you're not beast form, he just leaves. He will not fight you unless you're transformed. And so we'll let me see if I can find my favorite trans. Oh yeah. We do. Where is he? We got Chicken Leg. This is the first appearance of Chicken Leg, who will come to play a more prominent role in just a minute here. But there's this really fun glitch where you can see I destroyed that rock, right? And now, as you go forward and these guys kind of fall down here, they're still punching the rock, even though it is gone. So they'll just stay there punching that rock forever. My favorite transformation of the bunch here, though, is... well, actually, I'll say here, since we have it first, you get the scenes between levels that shows Athena in captivity here. And so it's kind of vaguely trying to tell you a story, which ultimately leads up to a very interesting ending, which we'll get to in a minute. We'll get to in a minute after we transform into Tiger Mask. The person worth mentioning on this is Makoto Uchida from Sega, who will also have worked on another game we'll get to in a little bit here. The one thing interesting that I found in an interview when I was doing research for this, has anyone played one of the old Street Fighter 1 cabinets with the pressure-sensitive buttons, the pneumatic buttons that you're just absolutely hammering your fist onto? He wanted to do that for this game. Which would have been an absolutely terrible idea, because it hurts to play that cabinet. Like, it is a video game that actually hurts you. People like to say that hard video games hurt you, but this one actually hurts you. But I guess the owner of the patent device didn't want to deal with that small of a number of orders for the buttons, so it didn't work out. And it's a good thing that it didn't work out, to be honest. And so... the ending is really cool. So after all this, we're going to get to it in just a second here. So here's Athena. We're rescuing Athena, right? And so we're going to get kind of more scenes. And it's like, okay, well, I'm in my beast form and there's Athena, right? And it kind of shows you some stuff that happens, and slowly but surely you kind of realize, like, all right, something's a little bit weird here. It's like, why are there all these versions of Neff? Until it finally reveals that this was a stage play. There it is, taking off the costume, and then beer afterward. The one port I'll mention is the Famicom port, which is not particularly a good conversion, but it added some new levels and beast transformations. And when it says, if you played Altered Beast, you're like, oh, you get to turn into a shark. It's like, oh, I'm a shark man, right? No, you're just a shark. I don't know what was going on there. All right, and so no, it's not that Ninja Gaiden. It's the other Ninja Gaiden. The one that was an arcade beat-em up. Not really much of anything like the NES version, though the sequence of this is interesting. They came out fairly similar times, but America got this one first. Japan got the Famicom game first. They were worked on by separate teams at Tecmo, all under like this kind of mandate from the president of wanting to, again, take advantage of Ninja Mania in the US. And have, like, brand synergy, right? Like, these two unrelated things are both Ninja Gaiden. We're going to saturate the market with Ninja Gaiden, even though they're completely different games. This is not Ryu Hayabusa, by the way. He's sort of just a nameless ninja. Ryu Hayabusa is the guy from the NES version. The story for this is absolutely bonkers. It's 1999, and the American government has hired a single ninja, just one, to come over from Japan by boat to defeat a cult led by Blade Damas, the descendant of Nostradamus, who's looking to fulfill his end-of-the-world prophecy, and has apparently kidnapped the president and obtained launch codes for ICBMs. I don't really know that much about national defense, but I feel like they probably could have done better than a single ninja to prevent such a horrible situation. And the controls from this one are really interesting. You have attack and jump buttons that you can use in combination to kind of do these flips that you'll see here. You can flip off the wall, you can flip over enemies, and kind of toss them. And you can also, as you probably saw earlier, like jump onto these poles and swing and just kind of kick guys. You have these parts where you're climbing on poles and whatnot, because there's a specific button to grab onto things. Yeah, there he is. You're gonna need it too, because this game is pretty hard. It throws a lot of enemies at you at once, and they're fairly intelligent. Like, they group up on you, so unless you know how to deal with them, you're not really gonna have too good of a time. You get sumo wrestlers, and then you get these kind of in-between level scenes which show him like working his way through different parts of America, trying to safely cross traffic, which very unsuccessfully there. Right? Yeah. I wonder if they still have those bars above the highway in Staten Island. Probably not. And you get a not even legally distinct version of Black Sabbath's Iron Man here called I Am Man, that they've had to remove from versions that they've done of this game since, because there's just no way they would be able to get away with it in a bosses that look exactly like the Road Warriors from wrestling popularity. And let's see if we can get to Blade Damas. Oh yeah, that's right. We got these guys who let me get back to the beginning of them here. I'll let it transition into them. But yeah, so they're three kids in a trench coat trying to get into a rated R movie who are lining up for popcorn. There's the cart right there. This is not my best implementation I've done of this, but you're supposed to line them up on one side of the popcorn cart and get one of them to come out at a time for popcorn, and then you can just attack them. But Blade, well, yeah, the horrifying continue screen is maybe this game's biggest legacy. This probably gave people of my age nightmares. I don't know if it gave me nightmares, but it definitely left an impression. And there's just weirdo stuff in this. Like, look at this. What is that? What is that thing coming out of the water? It's got like a 12-pack of abs, too. And also, this is pretty great. If you know the strategies, you can just kind of be like, next, 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 next. They just keep coming. We'll show Blade Damas. This is Blade Damas. He's kind of a chump, if you know, just to kind of move down and keep attacking him and not let him do any of his moves. I couldn't knock him into I couldn't get him to fall into his own fish tank, but you can do that. It seems like that should have knocked him in, but whatever. I don't know. It's definitely, in my opinion, not as good of a game as NES Ninja Gaiden, but it's just very interesting that Tecmo did that. So, okay, now we're going back to Tokyo on the same boat. All right, and so finally we come to one that is in the MAGFest arcade, which is Splatterhouse. This is also 1988, and like the team who worked on this was trying to do a serious horror game, basically, and they kind of don't mess around with their imagery here, as you'll see in just a second. They had to make the blood sort of neon green to appease higher ups. They were like, well, if your game is just going to be about killing, then you can't, at least don't have red blood. So they kind of made the zombies maybe a little more alien-like almost, and just kind of had them vomiting / spraying out green blood. There's obviously a ton of horror movie influence over this, right? Like the main character, Rick, looks like Jason Voorhees pretty much. And at the beginning, you saw him and his girlfriend Jennifer going into West Mansion to take shelter from a storm, and he gets possessed by something called Hell Mask, which is why he's wearing the Jason Voorhees mask. The one interesting thing control-wise about this game is there's a jumping slide that's not necessarily easy to pull off. I don't think I do it too much. Oh, actually, what you see here is me juggling the shotguns to more easily defeat Biggie Man here, because he's way easier if you can just switch from one shotgun to the other instead of having to deal with him jumping at you with chainsaws. The bosses are all really memorable. You saw Biggie there. You saw like the pile of leeches. And you've got stuff like, he's not particularly a boss, but you've got like a bunch of heads floating around a cross that you attack with an axe, and you've got let me see if you've got some platforming here as well, a little bit of light platforming. And this guy, I'm gonna turn him up here because he's real interesting, because he calls in zombies at you. And I'm pretty sure he's saying, "I'm Cool Whip" here. And if you don't hit him by the time he says, "I'm Cool Whip," he brings all the zombies back. So you're supposed to hit him before he finishes that. And then you also fight Jennifer, who turns into a horrible monster. So lots of memorable bosses. And the staff interview revealed that the vocal samples were all done by the development staff. And they were horribly embarrassed by people like coming by and like hearing them just like yelling, just like all these things into microphones. Not an easy game, I would not say. This is another one you really kind of have to learn, especially like these horrible stages with the bubbles. It's just really, really rough. And then you get to do like platforming over like fiery logs for whatever reason here at the end. It's a game that gets by a lot on aesthetics, I would say, but they're pretty good aesthetics. And if you put a little time into learning the game, it's a pretty fun clear, though not necessarily an easy one. All right, so there was another there were many Double Dragon games, but there was also, Marion. If you're wondering what happened to Marion, it's not good. Not looking too good for Marion. And now he has a helicopter in his garage instead of a hot rod, which is, I don't know. So Double Dragon 2 actually came to America first. Instead of Japan first. So kind of leaning into their idea of wanting to make it an international title, right? But they changed the control scheme to be like Renegade for reasons that I was never able to find. It's the same thing where your attacks are all relative to the direction that you're facing. So, and here you're mostly back kicking. Like, this is not an elbow game anymore, unfortunately. Like, the elbow is still here. You can still do it, but it's not as advantageous as it was in the first Double Dragon. So you're mostly back kicking, and just kind of, Abobo has like facial hair and long hair now for some reason. This one doesn't slow down like the first Double Dragon did particularly, but I don't know where people are on Double Dragon 1 versus Double Dragon 2, but like to me it's like they didn't really do enough with this. I don't even really think it's all that upgraded, apart from, maybe not slowing down. Like you've got a weird control scheme added to it. You've got a tractor. Everybody was really screaming for tractors in Double Dragon, I think. Which I cannot jump over to save my life, as you can see. You've got Machine Gun Willie back again here. There he is. But after you defeat Machine Gun Willie in this, instead of fighting your brother, you fight like a dark clone of yourself, who has this horrible move where he sinks into the ground. And if you're not basically in the air when he does it, you can see me getting caught with it there. It's really damaging. It sucks. And then we have this very weird art at the end here. Which I guess the Double Dragon canon is very fluid and weird. I don't think Marion is actually dead, but at that point she was. I'd argue that people like this version better than the arcade version. Maybe that's just my perception. But like this is like has all the moments that people remember. So like when you go back and you think of Double Dragon 2, you're like, oh, the helicopter, inside of the helicopter, which you'll see for a moment. None of that was in the arcade game. It was all in this. And this one has its own... this one, if you crank this up to the highest level of difficulty, which you have to get the true ending, is also very difficult. But on lower levels, it's a bit more manageable. Here's the arcade. I don't think here's the helicopter. I don't think I actually managed to get anybody out the door. But you can have them get like sucked out the door here if you knock them down. And it has this knee move, the hyper knee, that's a little bit tricky to pull off, but they just kind of go blasting off the screen if you actually manage to hit them with it. And then you have, unfortunately, like 200% more platforming that they added to this one. And I would argue it's even worse than the platforming that was in the NES Double Dragon, like having to go over these gears and stuff. Like, was anyone excited about doing this? Like, did anyone play Double Dragon and was like, it needs more platforming? There's not enough jumping on gears. I've never run into anyone who is excited about platforming in Double Dragon, so I don't think that person exists. But yet they kept doing it. All right, so this is probably the Kunio that you know. You'll see kind of I think, again, this is mostly from the Japanese version, Downtown Nekketsu Monogatari. So it's like, there's a little bit less of a disparity between this and than there was with Renegade. It's mostly just like, okay, they took away the high school uniform and they gave them a t-shirt and jeans. It's still like high schools fighting each other. So they didn't really change the story all that much, but they didn't know what to do with the Japanese high school uniform, I think. And from here, like, Kunio mostly went console. I don't really think there were many, if any, arcade games for that franchise after this. That just kind of ended up being Double Dragon. And everything for Kunio after he became this squat little guy, which he kind of looked like this a little bit in Super Dodgeball, which came before this. But this was really like the solidification of it. And it's the same kind of thing between the US and the Japanese version. It's like these schools have names, but in the Western one, it's like they called them like the generic dudes, the frat guys, the jocks, the squids, who I guess is the swim team. Yoshihisa Kishimoto had really nothing to do with this. I think he was on Double Dragon duty from this point. But the interesting thing to do with this is its RPG elements. So this is the first beat 'em up here that actually introduced RPG elements, which manifests itself as stuffing your face full of egg rolls to up your stats. So you buy food, you eat food, and slowly level your stats up. And you can buy things like books to do like the fast punch and the fast kick and things like that to sort of upgrade yourself. But I mean, it works exactly like you would think stats work in an RPG, right? Like, you can take more hits, you get more health. As you upgrade things, you do more damage. So it's like a much more approachable beat 'em up in that way, because you can kind of just grind your way through it. You don't really have to learn it if you're strong enough and you have the right upgrades, right? It seemed, at least to me at the time, it kind of seemed like it was this big open world. The map is honestly not really that big in this game. You can get from one end of it to the other really, really quickly. But at the time, it just kind of felt enormous. Like, I can go anywhere in this city and do whatever I want, even though you have to, meet certain conditions to trip certain flags to kind of move on with the story and things like that. You can just kind of go, all the way from where you started, to the gates of the high school and whatnot. And the other thing you can also do, I think we got it coming up in a second here. Yeah, here we go. You can go into the bathhouse and get naked. I think someone had art of that in the dealer's room, by the way, of him with the towel doing that, I'm pretty sure. Basically at the end you end up in whatever you want to call it, River City High, Reiho Gakko, and you go up to the top and you fight the Double Dragon brothers, which I don't really know what they were thinking, because in the Japanese version they were called Ryuichi and Ryuji, like the Ryu in there is dragon, so it kind of makes sense. But in the Western one, they weren't called Billy and Jimmy, they were called Randy and Andy. I don't really know what about that says Double Dragon, but they're playing the song. So, and this is kind of this sort of reveals like a new direction for a lot of console beat 'em ups, right? Like they didn't pick it up and run with it immediately, but this is what would happen with a lot of them. You get leveling systems to make them more approachable instead of having to like learn or memorize a game, right? But we're going back to arcades now for Golden Axe. So this was 1989, and you had 3 selectable characters. You had Tiras Flare, Axe Battler, who does not have an axe, and Gilius Thunderhead as the dwarf. Poor Alex. We'll never forget Alex. And so this game has a really, it has screams. I don't remember all the movies that it was taken from, but they actually sampled like screams from, I think one of them is from like Conan the Barbarian, and there's some other movies, but you get, let me see if we can, come on, where is it? It's going to be after this, I think. And then you have rideable creatures. There's Chicken Leg. He's back. This is probably a more notable appearance for him than in Altered Beast when he was just an enemy. But you have these rideable creatures. You'll see some dragons here a little bit later in a minute. The rideable creatures are incredibly strong. Basically, if you get a dragon, you do not want to lose the dragon. So many bosses are made easier just by being able to breathe fire on them. But you have these dashing attacks that you can see me just abusing here because they have ridiculously high priority. But the enemies can do them too. So like the enemies in this game are actually really smart. They have this AI where they're constantly trying to get behind you. So they're constantly trying to pincer you and get on either side. So if you're using your longer, slower combos, it's a real risk-reward situation because they're going to come up behind you and get you. So that's why you're incentivized to do like the jumping attacks or the dash things, like things that are just over with much more quickly and get them, off screen, so there's not as much of a threat to you. In this game, this game has magic too, by the way. You get like a real Tiras's level 6 magic is just this big old dragon comes on. And these different characters are all kind of balanced differently. So Tiras has the most magic, but her attack power is maybe not as great, and she has less reach. Axe Battler's kind of there in the middle with okay magic and better range. And Gilius has almost no magic, but ridiculous range, which you'll see in a minute. And there was a lot more storytelling in this. Like you had these really cool kind of like scenes between levels where they were kind of documenting the journey. Yeah, here's Gilius's back attack where he just does this roll across a very large portion of the screen. So like a lot of these games coming up here, like Crowd Control is the name of the game. But the next 2 games after this, like Crowd Control being the name of the game comes up to a whole new level. The one thing I'll show though before we leave Golden Axe is after our fight with Axe Battler here, which is there it is. Okay. And then we rescue the king and the princess who are just kind of strung up there. But this sort of has a little bit of an Altered Beast ending as well. I like this one better personally. So this was all a video game called Great Axe, but they're coming out. Yeah, it is. It's totally reverse isekai. Why don't they make more anime about this? Like the characters coming out of arcade machines. And eventually the heroes come out here as well. Here they are. And this is a Japanese arcade, presumably, because of the signage. You'll see in a minute they're tracing them down the streets of Japan, exiting video game Doi Doi. Everybody's favorite arcade. And then they just kind of chase them down the street here, which is very fun. Yeah, right? There it is. Hokari Sweat, legally distinct sports drink. All right, I think we have time to get through these next 2 here. So kind of closing on the end of the 80s here. We have a couple different versions of this in the MAGFest arcade. So TMNT, I believe they have the 2-player and the 4-player here. And that's like the thing that people think of first in this, right? That like this was not the first 4-player beat 'em up. That was another Konami game called Crime Fighters. But like this one obviously had like the huge license. Like Turtles were super, super hot at this point. So this is what people remember as the first Konami 4-player beat 'em up. And it played the TMNT song during attract mode, as you heard. It has voice samples in here. And it just came at like the perfect time for TMNT's popularity. And again, kind of like Golden Axe, you've got like trade-offs for the different characters. Like mostly everybody plays Donatello because he has the best range by far, and range is pretty helpful in this game. Leonardo is kind of the second, and then Mike and Raph are like really, short, stubby little weapons. And Raph is really tough because his that kind of jump up and swipe move that you see me doing with Donatello a bunch, he doesn't even have that, which is the most damaging version of the game. His is kind of like this roll. You got some glitches in here like this. I was trying to do this on the machine yesterday, but the stick was so tight that I couldn't get myself to move like diagonally down well enough to attack against the side of that. You've got some other weird stuff like here when you go down into the water here, you've got missiles that fire at you for whatever reason. And I mean, all the enemies, it's like TMNT iconography, right? Like the Mousers. But let me get to, Baxter Stockman, who is not in here as a fly. But he does have his famous catchphrase, Yippee-I-A. Remember when he said that in the cartoon? And also, this is the first beat-em-up that has rank. And by rank, I mean, like, the better you do, the harder the game gets. So shooters, shoot-em-ups are more famous for having this because they've had it at least since Gradius, maybe even before. But you can, if you don't die, the bosses will get tougher, the enemies will get more numerous, and you can kind of tell by how many pizzas it gives you at some of the bosses. Like, the more pizzas it gives you, the higher your rank is. And it is, you'd think that they would have taken it easy on you for this being a licensed game, but they really kind of didn't. Even just the regular enemies will wear down your health really quickly, and it's, again, you kind of have to learn boss patterns to do what's effective, because if you just try to get up to them and mash buttons, like, it's not gonna work. We got vehicles, though we had way more vehicles in Turtles in Time, the sequel, but we got some skateboards here. And yeah, here with like Krang, like if you just get up in his face and start hitting him, like you won't have a very good time, but if you just kind of poke him, stick and move, you'll probably do way better. And let's get to Shredder here with this weird like instant kill beam right there. That kills you in one shot. It turns you into it's this demutation beam that turns you back into a baby turtle, and that's it. If he hits you with it, so this is like people say about these arcade games. Sometimes it's like they call them quarter munchers, which I think is usually overstated. It's like you just got to spend a little bit of time learning this. But this one is the first one that I played anyway that had these one-hit kills. So it's very it feels a little bit more at parts like it is just trying to take your money and make you put in more. But just to cover it here real quick. We also had an NES port of this one, which probably a lot of people played. It added a bunch of new content. It added like the snow level is all new here. It's a pretty good conversion. It feels right. Not all the same tactics work, but I would argue that in terms of like a boss and general gameplay perspective, it's a little bit easier, but still not too easy. Yeah, this polar bear got a hold not only of a leather jacket, but of a weather machine. To turn springtime New York into winter, and here, when you beat him, you turn it back, and spring is here. So it also had a lot of Pizza Hut product placement, because TMNT was doing a lot of tie-ins with Pizza Hut at the time with like the movie VHS and things like that. And then I would argue that the amount of content it added was too much. Like it's neat that they added stuff, but this version of the game is too long. It feels like you're playing it forever. And yeah, this is the other new boss they added, like I think his name is Shogun or something, where it's just like a robot samurai guy whose head flies around. All right. We have just about the right amount of time, I think, for the next one, which is probably one of the last major ones of the 80s. I did not see a version of this in the MAGFest arcade, which is a little bit surprising to me. I figured they would probably have this, but this is 89, Final Fight. The thesis statement for this, to me, it's not always about who did it first, but who did it best. Final Fight did not invent a lot of things that it does. It maybe invented the Super Joy, which is like, in the case of Hagar, it's the thing where you hit two buttons at the same time, and you're kind of like your like oh shit button basically, where you're getting surrounded and you just need to get out of it. And it has an infinite punch trick, which you can see me doing with Guy here. Not so easy to do with Hagar, but Cody and Guy, this is a good tactic to use for some bosses. If you can get your timing right, you can just kind of... I don't think I actually managed to take him down completely there, but it's a fun thing to practice. It's not as hard as you might think. But yeah, you got Cody, Hagar, and Guy. Hagar, I feel like, is probably the most well-known. I'm pretty sure I've seen art of him in the dealer's room. Slowest but strongest. He's all about grabs. He can chain grabs. Cody is a little more speedy. Guy he might be a cool ninja, but he's the worst character in the game. He doesn't really have much going for him. He's weaker than Cody. Oh yeah, he's way better in Street Fighter Alpha. He's like a pretty top tier character, especially in Street Fighter Alpha 1. And you have this particularly classic moment.
Oh my God!
Is it? Interesting. So they really were, yeah, because Metro City is supposed to be New York, I think. I can't remember if they explicitly say it or not, but I think it is actually supposed to be New York. But like, there's so much depth in this game. Like you have this idea of downward, like you have your regular jump attack there, but you have the downward attacking jump, which was Hagar's body splash that you just saw there, and you can do backward movement with it, which you're seeing right here. Which is actually your fastest form of movement in the game, and just how different the characters play and how you have to learn to work with them is just, there's so much depth. You can you eat food out of garbage cans, which is also really fun. You can pick up a cop's pre-chewed gum, which I did right there. You can see me yoink. And there's also something in this that I don't particularly showcase called alchemy, which if anybody's seen High Score Girl, they might remember alchemy. But it's basically, you have these barrels that you break, and if you input any direction on the joystick within 2 frames of breaking one of them, the contents will always turn into like a high point value item, like diamonds or gold bars, no matter what barrel it is. But the timing, it's 2 frames, so it's very, very tight. But apparently this was so desirable that when this was contemporary, like Japanese arcades would put specific alchemy buttons in to make the inputs for this more reliable. And you've got a lot of characters named after Western music. You've got Abigail here, who I'm pretty sure was named after King Diamond's second album, Abigail, because he's got like the face paint on and everything. You have like Axel and Slash, who of course are Guns N' Roses, Simmons, which is probably Gene Simmons, Roxy and Poison for Roxy Music and Poison, Damned, who they renamed Thrasher here, I'm pretty sure is The Damned, which was an English rock band, and then you had the Andores, which were not music, were obviously Andre the Giant inspired. The story for this one is it started as a development as a sequel to the 1987 Street Fighter game, and it was it even went into location tests and trade shows as Street Fighter 89. You can find a bunch of art of it as Street Fighter 89. There's way more fighting in Streets in this game than there is in Street Fighter, and with a lot more people. But a bunch of the Capcom staff took a trip over to America and saw that everybody was playing beat-em-ups here, and they were like, no, we can't make it a fighting game, we got to make it a beat-em-up. They're super popular here. And then they got feedback at trade shows that's like, you shouldn't name this Street Fighter, it's nothing like Street Fighter, why would you do this? So they changed the name. And famously, they did not want to make Guy a ninja in this, or some people at Capcom did not want to make Guy a ninja in this because they were like, why do we need ninjas? But the Capcom president actually actively pushed for it, and this is a quote in an interview with staff, saying that Americans are all about ninjas and dinosaurs, so we have to have ninjas in here. And the Mega CD port, which I'll mention last here, has voice acting, which is great. Let's get to Hagar freaking out here. There he is. And then we've got... Jessica! Yeah, so had voice acting. It's a really interesting port. I don't know really how accurate it is, because most of these ports couldn't like display as many characters, enemy characters on screen at a time. So they're not quite as accurate, and so the arcade version is kind of the de facto version, but it has really cool music on the character select screen too. It's a fully arranged soundtrack, so very fun. And that's all I got. I was hoping I'd have a little bit more time at the end here for questions and whatnot, but as I thought, I was a little overambitious with the amount of games I put in here, so that's as far as I got. If you like this, check out the YouTube channel, which you can see right here. Obviously, I can go in a lot more depth there and cover a lot more games, so if you really want to see the weird stuff, it's there. I didn't have time to put it all in here, unfortunately. So thank you.